Do you ever find yourself wanting to make a gift for somebody with a touch of the handmade, but you don't really have time for a long involved project? Well, I have the perfect thing for you using supplies from the Vintage Vibes Create Along box. Hi there, Sandy Huntress here with another polymer clay project from Create Along. So the first thing we are going to do is make the decorations for our box top, because these need to be pre-baked. We're going to use one of the grunge color fuse that came in the Vintage Vibe kits. I'm going to use this purpley blue and also the wooden fan charms that came in this set. This is a good project to do over a piece of scrap paper with a fold in the middle. That way you can just dump any excess powders back into the jar. Use a brush and apply a very thin coat of liquid clay to one face of your wooden charm. Now, if you don't have wooden charms, if you don't have pieces like this, you could use filigree. You could use just about anything you have in your stash. You could find a piece of veneer and cut shapes out of it. Cut fans or whatever shapes you want. I found this actually works best if you dump a pile of this out on your paper. I suppose I'll just dump it all out and press your piece down into it. Tap off the excess. And if there's any clogging up the holes, you can use a small brush or a tool to get those out. Repeat for all of your decorations that are going to go on the top of your box lid. And then put these in a 275-degree oven for as long as it takes to melt the powders. Here are my wooden pieces out of the oven. It took about 10 minutes for the color fuse to melt. Off camera, I went back in and added some liquid clay to the edges of these wooden pieces as well. I think it makes them look more finished. And again, I poured out those powders onto a piece of paper and then just dipped the edges in, knocked off the excess, and baked them. Now here's a tip for you. I baked these on an index card. Some of the excess powders dripped off. What you can do is when you take it out of the oven, while it's still warm, you don't want to handle it because you'll get fingerprints, but you can kind of just bend back the card and then slide these off gently, and that will leave all of the excess powders on the card and not on your pieces. So I was so excited. I love little boxes. So when they included this magnetic box in the Vintage Vibes Create Along box, I just had to make something with it, but I wanted it to be something quick and easy and not too complicated. So the first thing I did was I actually measured my box and I made a template. I'm just going to cover the lid and the front flap. Now I'm doing this in two separate pieces because if you see the way this works, you have to pull it out in order to separate the magnet, and then you can open it. So these two pieces need to be able to move independently. So you can cover the whole thing if you want. I decided just to do the top and the flap. And these are the dimensions for this box that came in the Vintage Vibes Create Along box. Just out of some cardstock. You could measure and cut with your blade, but the templates make it much easier. The next thing I did was rolled out some pearl polymer clay. Again, I wanted to keep this project simple, and I didn't feel like having to go through the trouble of painting this whole box to match. So instead, I started with clay that would work on it. So this is pearl. It is rolled out on a number 6 on my Atlas pasta machine, which is about 1 millimeter thick. And I've got the Deco fans pattern silkscreen from that same box. And I'm just going to burnish it lightly onto the clay so that it's stuck. I'm going to silkscreen this on using some silver paint. Any color would be pretty here. The silver is kind of just a nice subtle look. Now I'm only putting a line of paint up here because This is a silkscreen on polymer clay, which means the clay helps hold the silkscreen down. If you're silkscreening on something other than polymer clay, like paper or clothing, you want to put enough paint on to begin with so that you can do your silkscreening in a single pass. Because I'm doing this on polymer clay and it's stuck to the clay, actually I still might need a little bit more, I can go over it again and again and it's not going to leak. The problem that you'll find is if you're doing something that isn't stuck to the silkscreen, is that as you go over it repeatedly, it gives the paint an opportunity to leak underneath. So this is really nice because silkscreening on polymer is super easy. You want to take your silkscreen off right away. Isn't that beautiful? And immediately put this in water or gently wash it. Let that paint dry completely, then you can get out your templates. These templates, now the width of this box is just a little bit wider than the silkscreen, but that's okay. We'll get around that. I'll show you how. We'll actually turn it into a decorative element. So I'm just going to center this on my clay and use my blade to cut it out. You don't need this entire sheet for this box, so I was able to cut around a part that didn't silkscreen very neatly. I'm going to line this up on here just so these two pieces line up. When I put them on the box, the design will line up. And don't worry if these edges aren't perfectly even. Try to get them pretty much even, but we can fix that. Okay. Now I've got my box and some liquid clay. And just a thin layer over the box top. I know, I'm working white on white on white here. I'm going to use a clay blade to carefully lift this up. I've got my perfect size and shape, so I don't want to distort this. So we'll just do a little bit of a sawing motion. I'm going to line up the front edge so that it's centered. And it is a little wide, and that's okay. I did know that when I made the template. And then just going to smooth it down so there are no air bubbles. And use my blade and just run it along that edge to cut off the excess. It was actually just shy of 4 5/8. I knew that. I figured I would cut it to 4 5/8 as that was an easier measurement and just trim the excess. So that worked nicely. Just take your time. There we go. Looks like that back piece got a little stretch, so we'll just trim it off. Do whatever smoothing you need to do to make sure your edges are really nice and neat. 'Cause that's one thing about the Art Deco look, is that the lines are very crisp. Then repeat to add the piece of clay to the front flap. What we need to do is actually leave that gap so that when you flip it up, see how it fills in some of that space? So you can't have it but right up. See, there's more space now, less space when it's folded up. So you actually do need that little bit of space there. One problem with applying a large flat sheet of clay to a large flat surface is air bubbles. No matter how carefully you smooth it down, there's a chance that there's a little air bubble in there which expands in the heat of the oven and then grows and is unsightly after baking. What you can do to help alleviate that is just put a piece of deli paper or parchment paper on it and then put a tile on it while you're baking. And that weight will just keep it flat. So here's the box all baked out of the oven. Now there's just a couple things to do to finish it up. I want to tidy these edges with some paint. I thought to use the same paint that I used for the Silkscreening, this Sculpey Silver, but it's a little bit too transparent. So I am going to go with Swelligant Silver, which is what I have. But I imagine that any craft paint that is the color you want will work. To keep those nice crisp edges, I'm actually going to tape off these edges just with some painter's tape. Because it's tough to paint a nice straight line. So doing this, we'll have to do the ones going in one direction, let them dry, and then do the ones going in the other direction. Try to make those edges even. That looks pretty even. This may require a couple coats, but because we've taped it off, the actual painting is really easy. Yeah, at least a couple coats, I'd say. And you're better off doing several thin coats than trying to get it all in one very thick coat. It just doesn't look good. I have a feeling these edges are going to be silver, and that's fine. I'm also going to paint in that space once we start going in that direction. And then carry on until it's opaque enough for you. Let it dry completely, remove the tape, and then tape off the other edges and repeat. Alright, so the paint is dried. Let's remove the tape and see what we've got. As long as your silk screening is completely dry, like it's been over 40, oops, what's that? That's okay. It's been like a couple days since I painted this, so I'm not worried about it coming off with the low-tack tape. Oh, that's very nice. Nice crisp edge. And I will probably let that dry even more before I put the tape across. In the other directions. So here's the box with the second set of lines all painted and dry. I gave the first set of lines a couple hours to dry before I put tape over them. Looks like a little tiny bit came off right there. If some does, just peel it off slowly and carefully. If some does, you can always come in with a small paintbrush and touch it up. That's a really nice, neat look. And then all you have to do is use some strong glue like E6000 or super glue to glue your pieces to the lid. And there you have it, a really sweet jewelry box that makes a wonderful gift. Once again, this is Sandy Huntress for Create Along. Happy creating.